welcome to the Polite as Fuck podcast, Tiger.
Oh my God, I've been listening to you guys and I've been like stoked to come on. I've been looking forward to it all week.
Oh my gosh, yes, I'm so excited. I called you and I was talking to you first, and then later on in the week I had called on East, and literally as she picked up, she was like, you asked Tiger before you asked me," and I was like, "I'm sorry." Like, news in this family spreads like
Wildfire.
wildfire. This family is crazy. But for everybody else that is just now starting, Tigerlily is my cousin on my dad's side, and her and me and my other cousins all grew up together and are really, really close. And I wanted to bring you on the podcast because you have a very interesting job. So, can you tell us what you do?
Yeah. So I am a respiratory therapist. I pretty much do everything that involves breathing. So if you stop breathing, I fix that. If you have trouble breathing, that's me. And then sometimes we do like special testing. So like sticking arteries, that's our main thing. And that's pretty much it. Our sole focus is ear breathing. We don't do anything else. Like nurses, they worry about everything else. We focus on your breathing because that's what's going to keep you alive.
I think the coolest part of this is you did this while like traveling, right? So how did you start, like, not only wanting to be a respiratory therapist, but like to be a traveling respiratory therapist?
All right, so I'm going to jump back to when I was starting college. I had no idea what I wanted. My aunt on my dad's side was like, "Why don't you try RT school? Why don't you try respiratory? I think you'd be a good respiratory therapist." So at first I didn't get in on the first try, but the second round, like I was waitlisted, and then whoever didn't accept their spot, I went into their spot. So the first semester I applied, I got in, but didn't get in at the same time. It was really weird. So respiratory school is 2 years, which is the same like nurses, but nurses have what they call a BSN, which is a bachelor's degree versus my associates, but it's exactly the same. And nurses can do the 2-year degree also. So it made sense because I don't do poop, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. Like, no, like I will do anything for my nurses, but wiping people's asses, no.
That seems very fair.
So after I finished RT school, I went to the only level 1 trauma in my state, which was Alabama, and I just gained experience. I was working on traumas. They had everything you could ever imagine. Like they had like ECMO, which is a life support machine like a ventilator, but it's like a dialysis machine that oxygenates your blood. So like dialysis removes fluid, and ECMO puts oxygen in your lungs when the ventilator can't do it for it.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very complicated, and that's the easiest way I could ever explain it. So they have that transplant, so heart, lung, kidneys, everything. I think they were doing pancreas. When I left back in 2020, and it's one of the foremost like hospitals in the Southeast. So a lot of patients come from Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, like everybody goes there. So it was a great place to get my experience. To become a traveling respiratory therapist, you need a minimum of 2 years in an ICU setting. But when COVID happened, I was like right at the 1.5 year mark. And so they're like, shoot, it's okay. Let's just bring you in. So that's what happened. But the reason I left my first hospital is because they were not treating us fairly. Like nurses were getting, like I think with COVID, they got a 10K bonus for hazard pay. We didn't get that. We got, "Good job, team. Let's give you some pizza." And we didn't even get the pizza because I'm on nights. They don't feed nights.
Oh, God.
So I was like, "See you later, bye." And it takes about a month to get your first contract. At least it was for me back then. And pretty much everything else is history. I think that's like how I started traveling, and COVID definitely helped with that, because if I had to wait like with pre-COVID, I would have had to wait like the full 2 years. And that would have been another 6 months in a terrible hospital to
Yeah.
work for.
Well, so there were definitely like pros and cons for you working in this field during COVID. So if that being like one of the pros, I remember us talking a little bit about it of just like, I don't know, during COVID, I wasn't really, it was when I was living in Australia. So I didn't really know what was going on for a long time until I like called home and spoke with people. And I was like, wait, this is like serious. And then on top of that, you're working in a hospital and also dealing with like the lungs, which is like what COVID was like attacking. So, how was that experience?
At first, it was like, okay, this is just another bad flu. It's going to be 14 days of everybody staying at home. Like they were all about flattening the curve. Do you remember that, Erica?
I do. Yes. I was like,
Flatten
2
the
weeks,
curve.
do that. No
We could do
problem.
2 weeks at home. 2 weeks turned into a month, and a month turned into 3, and 6 months in, every single day. Like I was also trying to buy a house at this time. So I was working 60 hours a week because we need the help and I needed the money. And so I was working 6 on, had maybe 2 days off, and then did another 2, and then did another 6 on. So I was working nonstop. And that I did that for pretty much 3 or 4 months. And I was always put in the ICU most of the time, like COVID. So at least the hospital I'm at, we had 9 ICUs. So two or three of them, I want to say 3, were just COVID, and everything else was trying to get everybody away from COVID. So like our immunocompromised patients, heart patients, people that just could not get sick if they were anywhere close to COVID. So I was mainly there because everybody refused to go, and I was like, wait, you have the option to refuse? So I was like, cool, whatever. So every single day I did not eat. Like I did a straight 12 and a half hours just on my feet. We were flipping patients, which we call proning. So that's pretty much the process of taking your patient from your backside and flipping them onto their stomach. And then we also have this thing where we call swimming. We had swim team shirts made because we did it so much. So that's pretty much moving your patient's arm. So when you're flipping or proning, you have to have your patient's head turned to the side and one of their arms up. And so it looks like you're swimming. And so every 2 hours you had to switch sides. So we just called that swimming.
Why?
And so,
What was the reasoning for like flipping people to their stomach or like swimming them?
so if like you breathe better when you're sleeping on your stomach. And so prior to COVID, there were studies made and it determined you started oxygenating better and breathing better. And overall lung compliance is better when you're on your stomach, especially when you're like a 300-pound person, because that weight isn't on your lungs anymore. And so we were pretty much putting everybody, like, even if they didn't have COVID, you have COVID on your stomach, you go. And so they have to stay on their stomach for a minimum of 16 hours. Oh. And then, yeah. And we were like moving heads, and it's not like moving the head is an easy thing. You have to have like a minimum of like 3 nurses. And then at my hospital, it was 2 RTs. So 1 RT, and then RT is just the acronym for respiratory. I can't, like, respiratory therapist is way too long, so we just cut it to RT. So my hospital had a policy of 2 RTs at bedside with any kind of movement of the head or the body. And so like 1 RT holding the airway, and then the other watching the circuit that goes from the ventilator to the patient. So making sure it doesn't disconnect or anything, or holding it. So it's just an extra pair of hands. So we were doing that pretty much every 2 hours.
Were most of the patients like unconscious?
Oh yeah. When you're doing this, they are paralyzed and sedated.
Oh, okay.
Unless we had a paralytic, which did happen in like month 3 or 4 of the pandemic. We did run out of all that stuff. And so you were probably awake for a good bit of it. I mean, we would try to like give you like extra while we were doing this, but we ran out of meds. We ran out of ventilators. We ran out of a lot of stuff. I mean, this is Alabama, and like, and also like the politics of it. Like, people in the city of Birmingham were amazing. I loved it. People outside of Birmingham were not that great. You probably remember the news, like, oh, you can't force me to wear a mask. I don't. I want to go to get my hair cut. I want to go to the grocery store, like all those things. And so like those patients or those people outside of the city would get really, really sick. And so they would either have to be flown in to Birmingham or just take an ambulance ride. And so we were also dealing with that. So we had our own population, and then the population outside the city had to like, we had to like deal with. I mean, we had, I think, I want to say like 160-ish ICU beds, and most of them were COVID, if not all of them. And it just became like canceling procedures, canceling anything that had to do with not COVID. And we were also getting patients from outside, like way outside, like Mobile, which is like a 3 or 4 hour flight. And then like people from Huntsville, like we were in like Birmingham is dead center in Alabama. And so we were just getting patients from all over. And at one point we were like, we can't, if you're not in Birmingham, if you can't get here by ambulance, we can't take you. And that happened to every city, every hospital in the nation.
Did you work at another hospital during COVID? Like when you left, was it still kind of like chaotic in the hospital, or had things like calmed down?
So I think I left Birmingham in October 2020. So up until that point, I only worked at that one hospital, but I was also doing close to 60 hours a week. So, but once I left there, I completely gave my notice and quit, like didn't go like part-time or PRN. I just straight up quit. So from there, I went to Miami, and I worked at Jackson Memorial. God, I don't want to badmouth a hospital, but that was the worst place I've ever been in my entire life. I wouldn't wish my worst enemy to ever go there. Like, like the language barrier, the equipment, the staff. I mean, every single day I went into work, I almost got hit by a bus. And that's not like the bus outside the hospital. Like they have these like, most of the time the respiratory department is in the basement. I don't know how that happens. I've been to 2 hospitals out of maybe the 8 or so I've been to. We were not in the basement. We were always in the basement. Hospitals, if you're listening, please stop putting us in the basement. We want to be in the penthouse. I'm sorry, I had to throw the Taylor Swift reference. And so in those basements, at least at this hospital, they had these like golf carts, but they were like the size of tanks. And almost every time I walked down there, I would get hit.
Oh my gosh. It sounds awful.
It was awful.
Zone.
And then also the state also issued with outside the golf cart incident, like working there. I was only there for 8 weeks. I didn't do any overtime because I just did not like it. And I was also making, like in Alabama, I was making maybe $20 an hour, and then a shift differential between like $2.50 and $3.50 depending on what time of the night I was in. But it was the first time in my life I was making a livable wage. So I was like, I don't need overtime. I'm gonna work my 3 and I'm gonna get out. And so it's pretty much what I did. I think the way I did it, because I think I did like my 2 weeks in a row, so like it would be 6 on. And so I would just get like an Airbnb close to the hospital, stay there for a couple days for my work week, and then skedaddle. And like my dad lived like an hour away, so I would just go home. And then my mom lived like 2 hours away, so like I would go back and forth to those. And after that assignment, I learned you're not supposed to do that. So like we'll get there eventually.
So what were all the places that you've lived and worked since starting this RT journey?
Okay. So I'm gonna start in Florida because I did most of my assignments in Florida. So Miami, Gainesville, Cincinnati, Ohio, this very, 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 very small town in Virginia called South Hill, and then Alaska, pretty much. Those are mostly it. I did a lot of
like through Alaska in there, like, oh yeah, and that place too. Forgot.
I spent most of my time here in Alaska in the last 2 years or 3 years I've been traveling. So I was like, Alaska. And like as I'm looking out at like the mountains, and it's like one of the first non-rainy days this month.
So yeah, you now permanently live in Alaska. How did you end up getting there? What do you like about that place?
Well, first off, it's Alaska. It's hard to describe Alaska if you've never been there. So the only way I can describe it is nothing but mountains. And like I live in Anchorage, so it's kind of like a valley. So you're like in a bowl of nothing but mountains around you. And like, do you know, like you remember back in like the cartoon like dinosaur movies, and like there's like mountains everywhere and it just looks like a dream home or a dreamscape? It's what Alaska looks like. Like I could be, if I go an hour north, I'm in the most beautiful landscape you've ever been in. Like you don't, like there's people there, but there's not people because you can't hear them. And then if you go an hour to south, then you're pretty much in the beach and you can watch whales from where you're on the land. It's just so beautiful here. And then like the people, like it doesn't feel like you're living in America because almost everybody's nice and half the population's Canadian.
As everyone says. What's funny is
Yeah.
I feel like when I meet people, like especially from Europe who come here, they're like, everyone in like in California or wherever is so nice. But when you live in it, you're like, really?
It was just like a big culture shock when I moved here because the first time I came, I was in the dead of winter. I'm from Florida. I've never driven in snow in my entire life, and I pretty much almost crashed the first day. Thank you, rental cars, for not having snow tires.
Oh gosh.
I couldn't find a grocery store because they don't have normal names here. Like I've never heard, like we have Cars, Fred Meyer's, and Walmart. And I couldn't for the life of me find the Walmart.
It's hidden
We
in
have two, and I couldn't find either or. Um, and then the snow, the way they plow it, they pretty much plow it until like you can't see above it anymore, and then they plow some more. And so like you couldn't see anything, and all I see were like banks of snow on the side of the ground. I was like, where am I supposed to be driving? Oh, there are also like no lanes, like lane markers, because it's covered in snow.
Wow.
It
This
was
was
really
the first time in Alaska
first,
with that.
first time in Alaska. So like prior to coming to Alaska, I met one of my now friends, Tanya. Travel RTs, we have these Facebook communities to like make friends and find contracts. So I was like, I think she was the one that posted like who's going to Alaska, and I was like, me. And our contract started at the same time, so we were just like pretty much trying to find housing together, cars, because in Alaska it's very remote. They don't have a lot of rental cars, and most of the time it's just cheaper to buy a car while you're up here and just sell it before you leave. And that's what most travelers did. I was traveling with my dog, so I couldn't really do that. So what I did is I drove up from Florida and then shipped my car across. And so in like the week it took for my car to get from Seattle, Washington to Alaska, she pretty much drove me everywhere. And then even and after I got my car, she was like, you're not allowed to drive me. And she's from Wisconsin, so she knows how to drive in snow. So she drove me everywhere that winter. Like we went everywhere. We went to Seward, we went to Homer. We did everything. And so it was really nice.
That's
But
that's what another question I had for you is like the lifestyle that you lived, because I know that you're in Alaska right now pretty like permanently, but I know in the past, just with you traveling and going to all of these different places and not really being like settled, that like I don't know how, I mean, I don't really settle, but I mean you would be at like places for months and then go, or even sometimes like weeks. So how would you put yourself out there to like make friendships and have connections with people?
So my first thing I would do, like, but this is back when I was dating, like trying like actively date. I would download the dating apps and then like try to meet people that way. But like my first like group of friends are always my coworkers. And like they're the ones that tell me, oh, don't go to this side of town. Oh, you should try this. And then I usually go from there because I like most of the time it's me and my coworkers, and I do work a lot when I'm on assignment. And I also at the time was living in my RV, so that's like another group of friends. Like people in RV parks are amazing for the most part, and they always invite you out to do things. Or they have campgrounds. Like when I was in Virginia, the campground I was at did like hosted these like I can't remember if it was Fridays or Saturdays, but they would host these like live concerts at the back of their campground, and it was always so much fun to go. Like I would never know who's who, but it was fun to just people watch. Um and then when I was in Gainesville, um they only trained me to one unit, and it was because of COVID, so it was like a strictly medical ICU. And so like everybody there was my age, so we always went out and had drinks after work, hung out. And then when I wasn't like trying to be sociable, like it was just easy to stay home or like go outside, hike and stuff. There's like no shortage of people trying to be nice and try to make friends, so it's like I never really had problems making friends with people unless like most of my coworkers were like above 40. And like when I was in Virginia, that was definitely the case. Like I think everybody was in their 50s. And they're like, we have kids and lives, so let's not hang out with the only traveler in the department.
You're like,
And she's also 22 at the time. I think it was 23, 22. She's 22, and yeah, let's not. And
well,
then pair that
I
with a
know
small town.
that, and I feel like it's just easier to kind of connect with like people your age too, especially while you're traveling, because I feel like with some like older like relationships, they're looking for someone that's going to be like a little bit more like permanent.
But like I had great times everywhere I went. Yeah, like now like I have friends like pretty much everywhere. Like I have people from Virginia, Florida, Ohio, like, oh, where are you at now? What are you doing now? And I'm like, I'm in Alaska.
So this is a permanent, like you're not being a travel RT anymore. You're
Yes. When I was in Ohio, I was like, do I want to continue traveling? Because like since we're technically in a post-COVID world right now, like the amount of COVID cases have significantly dropped. Like I don't think I've been in like a severe COVID's room in ages. Like my last severe COVID was like maybe last month, and the only reason it became like a severe COVID is because that patient had other problems that just made the COVID worse. And so I haven't had to deal with like that level of COVID, and I want to say over a year, because last time I was in Alaska was like maybe the last time I had a bad COVID run. So like I haven't really dealt with like bad COVID and like bad assignments and like bad anything dealing with COVID in a long time. So it's just like the money has also dropped off for the travel. Like when I went into traveling, I was like, I looked at my finances and like, what is the bare minimum for me to continue traveling? Because when you're traveling, you have to duplicate your expenses. So that means you have to have a rent or mortgage in your tax home. So what that is just where you're living. So when I started traveling, I was in Alabama, so I had a mortgage, so that was my duplicate expense. But then when I sold the house, I had to move to Florida and pay rent. I paid my mom rent at the time.
wait, they like make you prove that you're paying for housing?
Yeah. So this is pretty much the IRS. So you have to prove that you have a duplicate expense. So because you get paid with travel, like the reason why traveling is so like lucrative is because you get a tax-free housing stipend, tax-free food stipend, and then on top of like your wages. You get all that money tax free except for your wages. And so what agencies would do, they would max out your GSA, which is what allows you to get so much tax free, and it tells you like what the agency is allowed to pay you tax free
Yeah,
for
but
housing.
That's annoying though, because you would still like you still had to find places to live wherever you went, right? And I know for you,
Yeah.
you ended up just buying an RV, which we can talk a little bit more about, but like for anybody else traveling, like even if you can prove that you're somehow paying rent somewhere else, like maybe they are like you were actually paying your mortgage, you know? So you were paying your mortgage on top of trying to find a place wherever it is you were, right?
Yeah, so that's why they like it was so lucrative because like most of the people that were traveling had husbands or spouses that were staying at home with the kids, paying the mortgage and going out, and then you could use that. That's why the stipend is tax free, is to pay for your housing in your new city, and that's why the wages were so big. And so like when I got into it, I had like a bare minimum number. Like I would not travel if my wages ever became lower than that, and I hit that mark when I started my last contract in Florida, which was West Palm, again when I went to Ohio. So I was like, you know what? And I was also at the time trying to go back to Alaska as a traveler because they were still paying the only like they were still the only people paying COVID rates. And I was just kept on trying, but like the hospital I was trying to go to was like, oh, we were just like missing each other. So like they would need like a start date this time. And I was like always in a contract. And then like this last time around, they were like, um, hey, we need somebody for your start date that you told me about. And I was like, I actually just re-signed with the hospital I was at. And then like a week later, the hospital I was at was like, oops, sorry, we overhired our travelers and we're going to cancel everybody. So we pretty much all got fired all at the same time with no notice.
Oh my God.
So yeah, so that's pretty much what made my like my final decision of stopping travel, because at first like it's like I'm paying so much money for my RV, plus like um my RV broke down right before the Ohio contract, so I had to leave that at home and like find a brand new like furnished apartment, which is another struggle. So I was like, you know what, I'm done. I'm gonna wash my hands of this and I'm just gonna move to Alaska.
Yeah. Well, before we dive in more about like Alaska, because it sounds awesome, but like RV life, what made you think like RV life was good? What was fun about living in the RV? What were some of the challenges that you faced living in an RV?
What got me into thinking about RVing was just all the people doing like the van life stuff, like at the beginning of the pandemic. And like when I started traveling and when I bought the RV was like a good 6 months to a year into like the COVID situation. And so I was like, this is cool. And also, RV living is so much cheaper when you're having to like duplicate expenses. And it's also easier to find housing. And like I was also traveling with my dog. Most furnished apartments do not allow you to have pets unless you're paying like an exorbitant amount of pet rent and like a deposit. So it was just not worth it overall. Um, so like my RV loan for my RV was like $450 a month, and then most place like and then like then you have to pay your campground fee. And most places like your RV your RV spot is maybe like the cheapest place I've ever paid was like $450 a month, and the most it was like maybe 1,000.
Oh,
And like furnished apartments at the time were going at like 2,000 a month plus like pet fee plus like utilities, like all the normal things of having an apartment. And so like that's all included with
Yeah.
your RV site. So like I didn't have to pay electric, I didn't have to pay water, I didn't have to pay sewer, and it was just easier. I mean, you don't have to pack and unpack. And like my last contract in Ohio, like trying to figure out where everything went and what suitcase, what do I need to bring home to ship to Alaska? What do I need to keep in my car so I can go to Alaska? It was just a lot.
Yeah.
So it was just so much easier. And I didn't really like apartment living when I was living in an apartment. So I was just like, yeah, let's try this. And it worked out while it did.
No, that
how
makes
long were
sense.
you in it?
Um, about 2 years.
Oh, dang.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. I had to leave it when I went to Alaska the first time because it was winter and there's no way I was gonna drive that up there. And then I had to leave it again for Ohio. So like I was traveling for 3 years, but I was really in it for two.
Gotcha. I wanted to ask if you had any, so like two, maybe one story that maybe stuck with you that was like a really hard time through this path. I know there's only like so much that you can share, but if there were any moments that would like stand out particular for you. And then of course, on the other end, something that was just like really beautiful or like a memory that you hold on to is like this path of like being a travel respiratory therapist.
Yes. So the one that got to me the most, and this is what made me start having like going to therapy for like burnout and depression, is back when I was in Gainesville, Florida. I don't know, I think you were still in Australia, or I would have probably called you. But I had this really heart-wrenching case, and this patient was a lot younger than me. And at the time I was, I think, either 22 or 23. And pretty much what had happened was that they were having headaches and decided, let me go to the doctor because they're not getting better. If not, they're getting worse. And so they go to the doctor, they get all the imaging, they get all the things done, and they get diagnosed with stage 4, like brain cancer that's pretty much causing internal bleeding in the brain. And so during that time, and like from the time they were diagnosed and the time that they saw me was maybe a week. And so they come into the ER having respiratory distress, not being able to follow command. So in that process, they were intubated and then shipped up to the medical ICU. And from that time on, like, it was pretty much, they're not going to make it. Let's consult like palliative care, comfort care. Outside the hospital, it's usually called palliative care, but in the hospital, it's usually called comfort care, because when you're in the hospital, most of the time you won't be able to get home to die peacefully. So we just call it comfort care to make it as comfortable as possible. And I took care of this patient for the entirety of their stay. And so like admission to pretty much ending. And what got me the most was just how young they were. And like even now, like I don't remember her name or their name. I just remember the faces and all the people that cared for her. Like we still had those like COVID policies in place where you're not allowed to visit, but they made it an exception for that family. And all like every time I'd go in the room, it was just nothing but people crying and people holding her hand and just trying to be there for her and her family. And it was just always just sniffling, crying. It was just always something, and it was just nothing she could have done. Just, I mean, you couldn't have gone to the doctor. I mean, and gotten there sooner and gotten the diagnosis sooner and survive. It was just nothing. And so we were just waiting for family and friends to do their goodbyes. And so I always ask, do you want to be in the room while I take the breathing tube out? Because it's very painful. And not very painful, but it's very disturbing to somebody who's never seen it before. And we knew as soon as I took the tube out, well, she would probably die within minutes. And so I let them know that at the time, and they were all okay with staying in the room. So I'm literally like huffled over by my ventilator and between family members, holding hands, touching, and doing all these things. And like, so like, all right, I do my whole spiel of like how this is going to happen, what alarms are going to go off, what it's going to look like. And so during that time, I'm just talking to her. Like, I know she's probably not there anymore, but I'm talking to her to make everybody else feel better. And I'm just explaining everything over again and just like, okay, now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do that. And I think that was the first time I've ever been like emotionally involved with a patient, because just everybody in her care, in her like home life, like you could tell she was extremely loved, and like everybody loved her. And like it was just, I don't know, heartbroken, because I think that was like the youngest patient I've ever taken care of at the time. And because I'm strictly adults, like I don't do kids. Kids scare me. Neonates scare me even more. And I don't deal with patients, or not patients, but parents. Like I just can't. And so that, I think that's what got me. And like I just remember driving home and like talking to Anais, like I don't know how this is, like why did this happen, like how, like I was also like like super confused at life overall, because like if life is supposed to be good and if God is real, then how does this happen? And
Mhm.
like I did like a huge like depressive episode. I think like I was on my 6 day stretch at that time, and so I had like a good 8 days off, and I was like, how does this happen? Like I was just like, I don't know, it's just really sad, and I still get like emotional when I think of this case, and it just makes me like, I don't know,
Yeah,
sad.
of
And that's
course.
and that was like 2 3 years ago now. I want to say like closer to 2. And like I like if their family is watching this, or if they even see my face ever again, because like I still think about them regularly, like every so often, like something comes up and it just reminds me of them. And what also like hurts the most is like I'm usually the last person somebody sees if I'm pulling the tube out or putting one in, and it's just like just knowing that my face is going to be probably the last one you see for a long time is just also like very heart-wrenching.
Mm.
100%. That's definitely a hard part of the job. It's literally like you're a therapist. Like it's not just some title. It's
Yeah.
literally that customer service is something. This is dumb, but like, do they train you for this kind of stuff? Like, do you feel like I feel like, not that I'm an expert. I mean, I do have watched Grey's Anatomy. But they have episodes where they talk about like how the doctors are supposed to approach families, because it's still like customer service, if and like when you really narrow it down.
Mhm.
And I feel like with this stuff, it's very heavy, it's very deep, you see so much, yet you're expected to still have like the best customer service. Do you feel like they trained you?
Um, when I was in school, we didn't really talk much about like end of life care. Like we talked about, like we touched it briefly because like our sole responsibility is to keep somebody alive. And like end of life care isn't something that's very talked much about. And like I didn't have to like palliatively take out a tube until COVID happened.
Mm.
Like there was no training. There was like, I mean, there was training on what to like talk and how to say things, and it's not like formal training, it's just whoever trained you to be who you are today, like being like, this is how you do it, this is how we're going to walk, and this is how we're going to talk, and this is like exactly how we're going to do. Because like when you're like when you're a student RT, you're following a very experienced therapist for the whole 2 years you're in that program. And then depending on what hospital you go to for your, like once you actually become a adult RT, um you're still following pretty much, like for me it was the same people I was training with as a student. So like it was, I think, 6 months of just following the same person around over and over and over again. And like it just depends on what comes through on if you're gonna be able to have an experience of like doing this with somebody that is experienced.
Mhm.
And for me, like I feel like I'm very caring and very empathetic, sympathetic, I don't know. And yeah, we're gonna skip that word.
Both of those were accurate, I would say.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it just depends on what's coming through for you to get that experience. And both times, like when I was a student RT and then when I was a adult baby RT, um, like I just never had a case of pulling out a tube because they're gonna die eventually. So the family is like, okay, let's let them die peacefully. And that I was on day or night, so we don't usually take out tubes palliatively anyway on nights because family isn't usually around, and most of the time family wants to be there. So we just keep everything the same until family can get there, and that's usually on day shift. So I
Mm.
didn't have to deal with that anyway. But like with COVID and all the normal things of healthcare outside of COVID, it's just like the first time I had to deal with death and be death, like have like a very one-on-one conversation and be there constantly.
Yeah.
No kidding.
What are some things like in therapy that you think kind of helped allowed you to work through this? Like what, I guess, I think about when we were in middle school, there were a few like teammates on our swim team that passed away, one from suicide and another from like just this freak accident. And so I felt like it's death is such a weird thing. And when you're young, I feel like it's I don't want to say easier to navigate. I think your brain is like maybe
Can push it out, like not really
yeah,
connect the dots. But I feel like, yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
like
Yes.
in your 20s when you're older, when your brain is fully formed, when you're like life is freaking hard. What were you working through with that?
So I'm gonna preface this all like in healthcare, you have to have two different personalities. And I'm not saying I have a personality disorder, but but like in healthcare, you have to pretty much take like you have to have bits of your pieces for healthcare and then keep the rest of yourself away because when the inevitable does happen, like your patient dies, like part of you like I like to say a part of you goes with them, especially when you're there when they die. So like you have to like separate yourself from your patients to a certain extent and not let the death phase you because I'm gonna bring this back to the footballer that had to have like CPR performed on the field.
Mm,
They canceled the game after that. They were like, we're done. We're gonna we're just gonna not can't like we're not gonna count this towards this season. And like you can visibly see everybody on the field is in tears and is visibly upset. In healthcare, we don't have that option. We have to go from that dying patient who may have died or is getting better, but like super critical, and then on to our next patient. And we can't let that emotion affect our next patient.
mm,
Like for me, if I'm in the ICU, like the maximum amount of like ventilator patients I could have is 8 to 10. And that's not like including like all the non-invasive patients I have. So like I could be monitoring and taking care of um like when I'm in the ICU, I could be taking care of maybe up to like 10 people at a time. And
mm,
then I have to be able to go from that dying patient or that patient that has recently passed and go on to the next one with a smile.
mm,
So that's what I mean by separating things and like keeping yourself away from your patients.
mm,
So when I went into therapy, that first part was pretty much talking through everything and like merging those two people together because I
mm,
feel like it's two different people. And like talking through my feelings and going through like techniques on how to like handle the stress and handle the emotions while I'm home.
mm,
Because like when I'm at work, I don't feel it. And I can't let it, I can't feel it. I have other things to do.
mm,
Um, and it's just like that constant cycle at work. And so like the first part of therapy for me was talking through that trauma and talking through the emotions. And
mm,
then from there we went from like my work traumas to like going through like childhood traumas and like healing my inner child and creating boundaries. And like I'm still in therapy, and that was like another reason why I decided to stop traveling is because I had to find a new therapist to every state I went to. And so I just need that time to have the same therapist for a while because having to like go through like the whole spiel over and over again just feels like re-traumatizing.
oh, for sure.
So that was like the first things that we did was like I pretty much word vomited like the first like 5 or 6 sessions.
That's good though to be able to like let it out because even though you're like compartmentalizing, it sounds like you were never actually letting anything out.
I wasn't. And like we're so busy, like we can't let it out. We don't have time to.
Mm,
Like the ICU I'm working in now has 30 beds and 20 of those beds is like the main ICU and like the last 10 is what we call like the cardiac ICU pretty much, and they're all the same unit. It's just different places where we put people even though we put people everywhere. It's confusing. Like it confuses me. um and so like I could be taking that care of the entire unit and like very real thing happened last week, or was it the week prior? Like I was taking care of one patient. They weren't a COVID patient, but they were in severe respiratory distress, what we call ARDS. So that is, I think, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and that's pretty much your lungs just stopped working. And so we were doing the proning, so the flipping on the stomach, and then we also added, this is what we also used during COVID, but it's called Flolan. It's pretty much a continuous nebulizer that opens up your airway and helps the alveoli just work like they're supposed to. And so they were on all those medications, and they were too sick to flip back on their back. And so I don't know what happened because I wasn't in the room, but so like the endotracheal tube, the cuff around the tube that keeps all the air going in and out through the machine, it popped. And so it's a very dangerous thing even when they're on their back. So like we don't move the patient from stomach to back or back to stomach without a doctor somewhere on the unit, because the doctors are the only ones allowed to put that tube back in. So we were like, what do we do? So we were all like, well, I guess we're flipping because we're gonna have to put this tube back on. So like somebody's calling the doctor. I'm not even at the head of the bed, because if the nurse was holding the tube at the time, like if they let go of the tube, it's coming out, and we can't let that happen without like a controlled environment. So they're like, you have the airway, I will be your shoulder, and we're gonna get this person back on their stomach or on their back. And so we're doing that. Doctor shows up, like, wow, that's really happening. And like, this was just not the patient for this to happen on. It hasn't happened to me in my entire career for a cuff to blow like that. And they weren't even, that's a whole nother story. But anyway, so like doing all of that, and like simultaneously in the next room was another patient pretty much dying and crashing. And so like I had to go from that situation, finish up, and then help my other worker, because they were in that room, like go from that situation to that one, like completely calm and like being helpful. And that happens a lot.
That's crazy.
And
I
they
think
don't
people
talk about that.
no, and I think people like they know, like especially during COVID, all this stuff of like thank your healthcare workers, and it's like there, but I don't think, I mean, it's a little bit more like something on my mind a lot because my mom is in it, so I talk and hear a lot from her, and then you're in it, like it's a lot in our family, but I feel like you forget what it takes to like take care of people, or like even when I'm like, you know, talking with people that maybe work outside like childcare, like it's just not, if you don't see it every day, you forget how taxing it is on like the people that are in it. And so when it's not like some like, oh, COVID's done, healthcare workers have it easy, like this has never been an easy job, an easy career, an easy path. And so like the people that do it are really like your superheroes literally.
Like talking like back in like the first few weeks of like the pandemic, like there are like sides of people saying, oh, healthcare workers are heroes. And then you have, I don't know if you heard this phrase, but it was very triggering for me. You signed up for this. You know what you were doing when you got into it. And so just suck it up, pretty
Yeah.
much.
You didn't sign up for a global pandemic,
Not sign up for
a lack of
pandemic,
resources.
lack of resources, like the running out of mask and having to wear one for a straight 12 hours, having to reuse said mask after it's been dripping in sweat, and having to pretty much tape it together for it to start working again. I also didn't ask for lack of resources on a management standpoint of allowing, like, you are trained that you're supposed to debrief after every serious, I want to say, event. So you pretty much get together in a room, talk about what happened, talk about your feelings and what you could have done better. I've been a therapist for almost 5 years. I've only done it once, and that was after a kid passed away in our ER. And that was the only time I've ever done a formal debrief.
That's crazy.
Yikes.
And the amount of like incidents that happens like that in a shift or in a week or in a month is outrageous for that to only happen once time in my entire career.
Yeah, seriously.
I mean, I guess to Ellie, like the second half of Ellie's question, like, what are the good things that have happened that have been like, I like love this. This is like why I'm proud to do this. I like whatever. You know?
I really want to say good question. For me, I do like the relationships I make with my patients' families, because most of the time I only get to know the family, because once they don't have that breathing tube and they don't need respiratory, like I'm not involved in their care, so I don't have a moment to go get to know my patient. I only get to know the families. And like this past week I have this patient, and the family's been there 24/7, and just like she's walking the hall and I'm not even in the unit. She's like, "Oh, hey, Tiger." She's like, "Oh, hey." So I mean, that's a good part. And I do like the using my brain part, because there's a lot of jobs out there where you don't have to like critically think and have to use, like, I want to say, both sides of your brain and think about other like complications and other things and bring other things to the table. Um so for me, I like the relationship building with my families, like my patients' families, and sometimes my patients are awake and I can make that relationship.
Mhm.
But those are like the most like two important things for me in this job. But like the actual job itself is like very taxing, and like I do like that part because I get to do like a lot of cool things that a lot of people can't do. But like the most important for me is like building that relationship with the patients and families.
I love that. That's a good point, to like that you don't really talk to your patients. You're more so involved with their outside lives. So I love that.
Yeah, they
Um,
come in.
I wanted to
Go ahead.
switch up a little bit and ask. So I know you are like an avid traveler, and I love that about you because I feel like we definitely share adventurous spirit. It's like runs in our family. And so quickly before we wrap up, I just wanted to see, like, based on all you do, like road trips, you have to get from point A to point B, and you just see all of these. You were just saying how you went to Denali last week or a few days ago. So what are maybe some of your favorite like travel places that you've been while on this traveling journey?
When I was here in Alaska last time, I went to Hawaii and visited Will, which
Yeah.
is my brother. That was one of my favorites. And then um after the Gainesville contract, I went to Key West and I went to the Dry Tortugas National Park. I'm a big national park girl. Like my goal in life is to visit all 63. So with Denali, that's number 6. And so this year, I think my goal was like 3 or 4. I want to say 3 because I've been to 3 this year. And yeah, so I think my favorite trip was the Dry Tortugas, because I was like at that point in my life, that was the one thing I wanted to do from like high school. And I never even like had the opportunity to actually go down there myself. um and Hawaii. Those were my two favorite trips. Coming up, I don't really have anything planned here. Like it's about to start getting cold again, so a lot of my trips are gonna have to like be day trips or until the snow starts because we should be getting snow here in the next few weeks.
Oh my gosh, already.
So
Have you seen the Northern
yeah,
Lights yet?
no, we won't get that until like closer to like October, November, when it's the sun starts going down and staying down for like 8-ish hours.
When you were in
But
Alaska now or late, like, or before, do you see like a lot of whales if you go to?
yes, I did. I went down to Seward a few times, and they have these wildlife cruises. And we saw a lot of orcas. And then like the time like one trip I saw a lot of orcas, and then the other time we saw a lot of like otters, like so sea otters. They're so cute. Like in Anchorage, we don't have the bay that the whales like to come into. And so if I want to go see whales, I usually have to go down to Seward and do one of those cruises, and they're really fun. And I get seasick a lot, so I try not to go on them as often.
Often, yeah. And then I wanted to ask, what are you listening to right now? And maybe your favorite book that you're reading right now.
So are you talking about music, right?
Yeah.
Unless you
Uh,
listen to audiobooks like Ellie.
Yeah, unless you listen to Harry Potter, which we've now mentioned so much. I think people are so sick of it.
um, that's how I read Harry Potter, because I couldn't sit down and physically read it, and I love Harry Potter. So I feel that in my bones. Right now, I'm listening to anything Taylor Swift. I
Oh.
cannot stop. I have a playlist that is 14 hours long, and I will reset that every 14 hours.
Were you like this before you guys went to the Eras tour, or this is more of like
It was like this when she announced the Eras tour, and it will not until it's probably long dead and gone. Like right now, I'm trying to get tickets for Miami or Toronto, but I don't think that's gonna happen.
Oh my God, they're expensive, girl. Good luck.
Yeah, you don't want to know how much I paid for the ones we got.
I don't want to know. I'm like, I'm just sticking with the hotel price, and that's all I'm worrying about.
And then book wise, I'm reading like what am I reading now is a good question. Yeah, that's the only way I can get through my work shifts is looking like I have to look forward to something when I get home, and it's usually reading. Right now I'm reading Checkmate, the Gifted, Obedient, Deadly Student series.
Oh,
interesting.
It is a reverse harem like superhuman series. I think it's a trilogy. I think there's 3 books. Yeah.
oh, that's fun.
Yep. And that's like my genre. Like it's really hard for me to read anything that's not like a reverse harem or like multiple guys.
And then are you watching anything? Do you even can you watch TV in Alaska? Is that a dumb
Do you have technology out there? In the
I don't know.
mountains?
I don't know if maybe you were just the
Um,
I don't fucking know.
yeah. I'm watching Grimm, and that is like the old like Grimm stories, like Cinderella and whatnot. But like it's like it's like the main character is like a detective, and he's the only one that sees these creatures, and he makes friends with some creatures but kills the other.
Oh wow.
Interesting.
Love that.
It's back from like the early 2000s, so it's a really good series. It's one of my comfort ones I go to. I rotate between NCIS, Bones, Criminal Minds, and this one.
I love it.
Serial killers are my jam. I'm sort of kidding.
Only kind of kidding.
Only kind of. Yeah. Well, that were all my questions. Did you have any more? Do you have any for us?
Oh, what are you guys planning on doing next with your podcast?
I think just right now our goal is like having more guests on. I feel like people bring, we have so many like unique lives going on all around us that we're like involved with, or even people that we just kind of meet on the street, literally, that we want to bring on just to like hear their story and share their life and see that like we talk about this so much about like there's not one path to walk in life. There's so many. And so bringing like that uniqueness onto the podcast and getting more people, I think is our top priority right now.
Sounds good. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, for our listeners, and our watchers on YouTube, because people better be watching us on YouTube, where can they find you? What's your Instagram? How do you want people to follow you?
It's a good question.
I know I have to do the same. I'm like, is it Ellie? I don't know.
Right. My you can find me on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. I might be on TikTok, but I only do it because people send me videos on TikTok.
Yeah.
Is TL Massey 26. And then I will be starting a travel agency soon. So get people up here, and that will probably be called Tiger Travels.
Tiger Travels. I love that.
So you can find me there. I'll probably for the travel agency part, I'll probably have it under my personal Instagram, and then on Facebook it'll probably be like a Tiger Travels like page or something. I'll be working on that this week.
That's awesome. Well, Tiger, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I love you so much.
Thank you for having me. I love you.
Of course. I love that you're in Alaska, and I cannot wait to visit you, and I'll give you a call later today.
I would also like to come to Alaska.
Yeah.
Thank you for
welcome to come. I live in a very small apartment that may or may not smell terrible.
Alaska.
Yay. I'll just go on the outside in the trees.
All right. Love you, Tiger.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.